Alright guys, so I've got a game on the board. This is a 60-minute game against a player rated, I think 618. So way lower than me. They've started with the white pieces. We've had e4, e5, and now obviously knight to f3. Very straightforward. I'm going to play something very regular, so knight to c6, and let's see what we get. So what I want to be focusing on particularly at this point, Re Lopez, cool, is opening and how the opening might translate into the middle game, and looking at how a more experienced player like myself might play the opening differently. But so far we've gone completely with theory. So this is move 3. We have the bishop out to b5. So this is the Re Lopez or the Spanish game. So what I'm going to do now, I don't want that bishop in my territory, potentially pinning my knight, maybe preventing me from pushing my d-pawn. So I've kicked the bishop with a6, putting the question to the bishop, and now white needs to decide what to do. And capturing the knight is a valid move. I'm going to recapture with my d-pawn. So this opens up a semi-open file for my queen, and we have castles. So far, completely by the book. Now I'm going to bring up my light squared bishop, I think. That's one idea, is to pin the knight so the knight can't move. You see, currently, if we goldfish now, everything's defended apart from this guy, this pawn here. Defended only by the king. Okay, so this is the only piece that's undefended. Now, that's a move. This prevents the knight from capturing the pawn. So that's one idea. I don't really want to be bringing my queen out at this point, and I certainly don't want to be pushing my f-pawn. So I think pinning the knight may make sense. Also, bishop d6. So what that does is that would put my bishop in the role of what we call a tall pawn. It's basically, it's a bishop that is plugging a pawn gap and basically pretending to be a pawn. So it's a tall pawn. It's not a bad move. I mean, I think when you're thinking about opening moves, you need to think about how many positives are there to a move, right? So here, one positive, it defends the pawn, which is currently undefended, right? Another positive is that it gets out of my king's way, which might then enable my king to castle, if I want to castle kingside. So that's two positives. I guess it also technically defends this pawn as well behind it. So 2.5 positives there. On the downside, it's not in a particularly active place, and I think the bishop would be much happier on this square where it's looking directly at the knight. Might even come back to here. That's an idea. So I think on balance, pinning the knight makes a little bit more sense. And if now that white has castle kingside, I think that if he chooses to, now that's simply a blunder. Okay, I'm going to give my opponent that. I'm going to let them off that for now, and instead I'm going to play h5. Am I? No, I'm going to bring my knight out. Knight to f6 defends the bishop. I'm going to give him an opportunity to make amends for that, and I think he really needs to play f3 right now. Because simply capturing the queen right now would defeat the objective of making the video. Okay, so he's moved his knight out. That's reasonable. So he's repinned his own knight. Okay, so now let's goldfish on the opponent's side. Just goldfish stage 1, looking for undefended pieces. So everything on that side is pretty much defended. Queen's defending the bishop, rook's defending the knight. Defended. King's obviously defending everything. And that pawn's defended there, and that pawn still is undefended. All right. So now, what should we be doing? Okay. Well, first thing to do is, are there any major threats? The knight is technically able to attack that pawn, but it can't capture because, again, the queen is lost. So that is not an immediate threat. A lot of people that I work with, students, beginners, games that I look at, there is a tendency to respond to threats that aren't actually clear and present. Okay, And this is one of those. I mean, yeah, you know, that is certainly a move. Bringing out my bishop to here, defending a couple of pawns, maybe giving my bishop some more scope. I think I'd like to bring my bishop out to there at some point. So the question is still how to protect this pawn, and again, I don't have to do it right away. I can't really put my bishop here or my queen there or there, because both of those block in this guy, and that guy's going to want to get out into the board at some point. I might also consider, I think, castling queenside. Now that the d pawn has captured outwards, right? Now that the d pawn has vacated the d file, we now have a semi-open d file, which means there's only one color of pawn on the file, and it's my opponent's color. That happens to be the color of pawn that I am able to capture if I want. You can never capture your own pawns. So putting like a major piece behind one of your pawns will restrict the movement of that piece, like a rook or a queen, for example. Yeah. Whereas an opponent's pawn could very easily become undefended at some point. You might just grab it, or you might line up a few pieces and you might barrage your way through. So what are we going to do? This pawn is actually undefended as well. I could simply grab that pawn. Did I spot that? Yes, I think I spotted that. So let's say I grab that pawn and the rook comes out to attack, or the queen comes out. I move my knight back to here. Then we've got two pieces looking at this pawn, which is undefended. So I think that is a move. I think that's a good idea. But, or knight takes and like rook comes out and then f5. How about that? Yeah, let's go for that idea. I like the aggressive front foot, forward thinking move. White has a pressing issue, which is that this knight is pinned right now. So I think maybe moving the queen to e1 would not be a bad idea. But I'm definitely thinking now about f5, do something funky with my queen, maybe queen to f6, something like that, and then try and castle this way, lining up Mr. Rook with Her Majesty the Queen. Moving the knight also enables me to play f6 if I want to do that and give myself a bit of a pawn chain there. Alright, now we have some tension in the board. There are pieces looking at each other. Clearly this attack is not a concern, but this potentially is. So now what you need to do is figure out if I take, how does that work? Is that good or is that bad? So let's say I capture the knight and b pawn recaptures. That gives white 3 pawn islands and an isolated a pawn. Right? That's not a bad thing. Let's say I capture and the d pawn recaptures. Okay? If that happens, I have potentially queen takes queen, rook takes queen, bishop takes knight, g takes bishop. Again, we've got isolated pawns and a big space in front of the king. So, and I don't think that not recapturing is really an option. So for that reason, I see good things either way white chooses to recapture. So I'm going to go for that approach. Obviously this knight is still pinned. I'm expecting one of these pawns to recapture, but either way it should improve my position. I may also then, having moved the queen, if we do have that, I may also have the ability to castle quickly and maybe get a pawn storm going on up the king side. See, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns on that side of the board, on the king side of the board. I also have 4 pawns over here as well. Whereas white has 3 pawns on that side of the board and 4 pawns here. So currently I'm actually a pawn and a knight up, but I would expect not to be a knight up because one of these pawns should be recapturing. The question is, which one will it be? Bit of suspense. Also thinking my bishop has a lovely little home here as well. Okay, so he's taken with the b pawn. Okay, so now, as we've said, we've got these 3 pawn islands, and that means that these pawns, you know, for example, this guy here can no longer be defended by the b-pawn, say if he goes there, and he can no longer defend the b-pawn in any way, because the b-pawn's now a c-pawn. Okay? And that then reduces the number of pawn defensive links that you can get. I, on the other hand, I've got double pawns on here, but that's not a bad thing. I can potentially line up all these pawns like that and have a much more solid position, which just gives me one or two things less to worry about in the game. Alright, so what's the story of the board? This pawn is under attack, excuse me, and undefended. Fair enough. Defended, defended, undefended technically, defended, bishop's undefended. Okay, so that's the story on my side of the board. On black side of the board, this guy's pinned. Defends, and obviously the king's got all of those. This is why we keep our pawns next to our king, because it's a defender of the pawns. Right? It's not often that useful as the only defender, but you know, it's the defender, so you can combine it with other defenders. Undefending your pawns doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, there's a tactic here now that jumps to mind, which is to push e4, and the tactic is called attacking the pinned piece. This piece is pinned right now, so cannot move. However, if I were to do that tactic, I would very likely expect one of these pieces to come to the e1 square, right? And that is doing the same thing. That would actually pin my pawn, because my pawn then couldn't, if my pawn's on here, it can't capture because it would put my king in check. So I think that the best thing right now is to move one of these pieces and castle. So that's what we're going to do. Now, where do we want to put, which do we want to move and where does it want to go? I'm very tempted to put my bishop up here. I just really like this diagonal, maybe down to b6. The knight isn't going to capture that anytime soon, and it pins this pawn against the king as well, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. See, the whole trick to chess, there is really only one thing in chess, which is about evaluating from the possible moves that you have, which is going to be the best one for you, right? That's what chess is. You do that, they do that, then it's your turn again, you do that, they do that, right? You're always trying to make the best move. Now, very, very strong players will think further ahead about what the best move means. And computers obviously just go and figure it out for themselves as well. And they're figuring out like 20 moves deep, what is the best move at this point. For us as beginners and improvers, that's not what we're here to do. But obviously we can't get 10, 20 moves deep, but we can follow good principles. We can think about space, we can think about pins, we can think about attacks and tactics and improving your pieces and controlling the board and all of this good stuff. So I hope you can see that's really what I'm doing here. I'm saying, look, at each juncture I have options, I have many options. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out, okay, out of these options, which is going to be the most favourable and which is going to be the most beneficial for me. And yeah, sometimes certain moves are forced and you need to make them, because if you don't, that will be catastrophic, or that will put you at a serious disadvantage, right? So this is what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to avoid putting myself in a position where I'm going to be forced to make moves that I don't want to make as well. So what's my opponent going to do in this situation? You can see there are a couple of things going on. So I avoided a pin situation, right, by pushing this pawn. But as soon as I castle my king, let's say I castle kingside, then that definitely becomes an option. And that becomes really quite critical because the knight cannot move, right? Unless, let's say my king's here, can the knight move and attack the king with check? Well, no, it can't. So the knight is pretty much pinned, because wherever the knight goes, even if it like grabs the pawn, I get a queen. And that's a huge material difference. And the point about material difference Now, having more material than your opponent doesn't win games, per se. You don't win by having more material. You win by checkmating your opponent, or you're making your opponent resign. Having more material can help you win a game, because the more pieces that you've got, the more squares of the board that you can control. And that means the more squares on the board that you can move your pieces to safely, the fewer spaces on the board your opponent can move their pieces to safely, the more pieces that you've got that you could line up for a concerted attack against your opponent, the more squares that you can simply defend, and the more pieces that can work together to coordinate and defend each other. Okay, right, now we have queen to e1. Now that, I think, is a reasonable move, and it's a move that I was anticipating. What that means is that now the pin on this knight is broken. All right. It also means that this pawn is now effectively hanging. All right. So this pawn is undefended at this point in time, and it's also attacked by two pieces. So I could think about capturing the knight, and that would probably result in g takes f3, which is a good thing for me. That definitely improves my situation. Another option I've got could be to simply to defend this pawn. Now, I don't really want to defend it by moving my bishop again. I can't really defend it with my queen, because we simply have knight takes, and my queen can't capture because we have queen takes queen, and I'm just down a queen. That's no good. So the only realistic option, I think, for defending is probably f6. Okay, and that means that if knight takes, pawn takes knight, even if queen takes pawn with check, that's not too bad. I just block it, say, with a queen. So that's an option. Another option is bishop takes knight. So if bishop takes knight, pawn takes, I go ahead and defend the pawn. It's only attacked once from this point, okay? Right, that's straightforward. How about bishop takes knight, queen takes pawn, check? That's the thing that I have to figure out. Now, in that situation, the queen is also attacking this pawn here, and is also attacking my bishop. And we do not like that, do we, precious? No, my love, we don't. He doesn't like our pieces forked. That would be a three-way attack, wouldn't it? Look at that. Bishop, king, pawn. Boom. Another option could even simply be to castle now. But that would pretty much invite one of these pieces to capture the pawn. So, what are we going to do? Part of me has to say, okay, look, let's say that queenie captures the pawn on g7, right? Now that is the pawn, my pawn, that happens to be right in front of white's king. White's king is already castled. White has declared their intentions to go kingside. So let's just think this through, right? I take the knight. Let's do it in red. I take the knight. Queen takes that, okay? And I'm not going to worry too much about this guy, right? That's okay. Let's say I put my queen here. And let's say queen takes the pawn. Okay, pawn is gone. And now my king castles, right? And now I've got a rook on e8 and two rooks that are working together to look after each other. However, then we then have queen take. No, we don't. No, we don't. All right, I'm going to go for that. Let's try it out. Okay, my opponent's got two main options here: the immediate recapture or the more aggressive queen takes e5. But I think I can get away with queen takes e5. I think we'll be all right. My bishop's moved now, yeah? So here it is. Queen takes e5, queen e7, and if takes, we just exchange, right? And then white's going to capture my bishop and end up with a horrible 4 pawn islands. Good, you've gone for it. Okay, problem as well with queen to... No, queen to here still defends his pawn, so that's okay. Right, I'm just going to play that move. I'm not going to think too much about it. Okay, so the queen's defending the bishop, and defending that, and defending that. Rook's defending that, nothing's defending this. Ooh! Damn! That's interesting. Is that interesting? I think it's interesting. Right, this calls for some thought. Okay, currently my queen is defended twice. Okay, so if queen takes queen, bishop takes queen. Rook takes bishop, king takes rook. That ain't going to work. So I think right now I can simply bring my bishop to safety. 2 attackers, 2 defenders. I'm not going to blink at this point. I think I'm all right at this point. So I think bishop back here. Queen takes, bishop takes. Nothing to worry about. So I think that is a beginner kind of miscalculation. Is simply counting attackers and defenders. And if you've got the same number of attackers and defenders, then generally it doesn't make sense. So here, queen takes queen, bishop takes queen. Okay, we've both lost a queen, but rook can't recapture because king takes rook. Okay, so yeah, white could swap off their queen at this point, but white's, remember, it's just lost a knight. Okay. Oh, nah, like that. Well done. That was almost excellent. Except that it fell to a surprise back rank checkmate, which is unfortunate. I didn't actually see that move at all, but that was a very clever move, you know, until it was so awful. Yeah, so this is a discovered pin on there. That's very good. Right, they want a rematch. Should we do that? Let's do that. Okay, going to be a little bit quicker here, and again, we're looking out for players in the 600 to 700 range. What do they tend to do? So, I don't know if I want to play Gambit Line. Do I want to play Gambit Line? No, I'm going to play something more classical. Because I could demolish a beginner level opponent pretty quickly, but I'm going to play the Scotch. Because it's what I do in this situation. Got knight f3, knight c6. Play the Scotch, and if takes, I'm going to play bishop c4. Ooh. Now this is great. I like this. This is a move that I don't face. So now I'm out of my comfort zone, and now I need to think. What do I want to do? Pawn takes there. Let's say pawn takes, queen takes. Knight comes out, attacks the queen. Not too bad. Pawn takes here. If pawn takes, I've got queen takes, but then knight can recapture. I've got knight takes here. Knight takes, pawn takes. I think that's the best, isn't it? Knight takes there, right? If knight takes, pawn takes. So I've won a pawn. And then the situation is there's no pawn on here, right? And if this pawn takes that pawn, I win the queen and force the king to move, and thereby lose castling privileges, and that will be a significant disadvantage in the game. And I tend to think that that's normally worth a pawn, maybe at least. Okay, so they've recaptured, so I'm going to recapture now, and now this pawn really shouldn't take there. So I'm actually a pawn up at this point. Okay, you've taken. And now, simple trade of queens on the d-file forces the king to move, and this king now cannot castle. Okay, there are 3 things wrong with this. One is it's going to be hard to get the king to safety, whereas I can do it in 2 moves, bang, bang. Okay. The other thing is this rook is going to struggle to get into the game, and this rook is going to struggle to get into the game. So let's think about, right, big thing. Do I want to castle now, or do I want to develop? And I think develop. Because bring this bishop out comes with a threat against that pawn. I can also bring my knight out with a threat against that pawn. Okay, that is a non-attack really. I can simply now just play c3, kick the bishop. So this is a move with tempo. That's a bad attack. Yeah, it's a check, but it's like a, you know, come up, poke you with my finger. It's like, stop it. That's all it is. And c3, it's not a great developing move. I mean, it takes 1 square away from my knight, but my knight can still come here, still attack this pawn. Knight can still go ahead and castle. It hasn't forced my king to move in any way. Might bring my bishop out maybe here. Yeah, bishop out first, and then knight to here, attacking the pawn. If the pawn moves, bishop can capture backwards. That might work. Alright, now this I think is poor, again. For one thing, dude, you've got a piece under attack. So if I take, retake, oops, retake, I win a piece. Right, if this bishop runs away, okay. So I can simply recapture with a knight. Recapturing with a pawn doesn't make sense because it isolates my pawns. I could take that pawn. Let's think this through, okay? Scenario 1. This is what I want you to do. Knight takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, okay? Equal. Scenario 2. Bishop takes pawn, can't be recaptured. This bishop can't take that pawn because it'll just get recaptured, okay? So he's giving away a bishop for a pawn, okay? Or so bishop takes pawn, bishop runs away, I win a pawn. Apart from I'm in check. Ah, yes, of course. All right, okay, so that's made up my mind. I'm going to capture with knight. Didn't see that one. So I take the bishop, he takes, okay. So there we go, kind of equal. There's a hanging pawn now. I can simply grab that with my knight, and I don't see any good reason not to. I could also develop my bishop with check on the king as well. Now if the knight decides to block, I could then capture on whichever one of these squares. However, I don't know, we have quite a nice wide open board, so I think that my having the only bishop on the board and this extra bishop is going to be pretty good for me. So I don't need to worry about making an equal trade at this point. So I'm going to grab the pawn, and then I'm going to castle my king. How to make better moves. That's all chess is. I might also target this f7 square. Like knight here, knight there, with a fork on the king. Ah, okay. My opponent seems to have anticipated me. So, I mean, this is just too tempting, really. I've got two undefended pawns here, which I can fork with my knight, so that makes sense. Thinking maybe bishop here. It's kind of defensive and passive, defending that pawn. And in fact, either of these comes with check as well. And this one comes with an attack on that one. Okay, so I'm going to take this with check, and next move I can take that. I can always escape. The king can't pin me down there. Okay, I think this is all right. I think I can bring out my bishop to defend this pawn if he wants to, but he can't go there and he can't go there, or there. Okay, because the knight's covering that square, so the king cannot actually progress at all. So I'm expecting king to here, and then knight can simply reroute round to there. Be absolutely fine. Okay, right, knight away. King might come here, that's fine. Knight comes back. King can't go to there, remember. Alright, let's defend with the bishop. I have an extra bishop and two extra pawns over my opponent. And that's kind of a biggie. Right, I'm simply going to capture, right? Now, this is interesting because I can't capture with the pawn because because my king would be in check, okay? So I couldn't capture with the pawn, but I can actually capture kind of for free with the knight because the king can't recapture because the pawn's there. Even though the pawn's pinned and can't capture the king, it doesn't matter. King's not allowed to move into check. So we have knight takes, and surely this is just winning because still the king cannot capture the knight because it'll be in check by the bishop. So, all right. Okay, so a few options here. Now, the bishop is pinned, the bishop cannot move. All right. The bishop's defending the knight, so the king cannot take the bishop either, which is kind of funny. However, the bishop is undefended, so I'm thinking that knight to here is probably best. Probably prompt that pawn move, but then I have a check maybe. But even so, I'm up 2 minor pieces and a rook now. So, I mean, I can surrender this bishop to the chess gods and sacrifice it. That's okay. Now, if rook takes, so I'm thinking now, if I castle, right, rook can't take bishop because knight takes rook. So I castle, pawn takes, I save bishop, or even grab that. I think that's all right. Because my king was on e1, of course, I didn't have an option like bringing a rook across to defend this. So I'm expecting now pawn takes knight. And if that happens, I'm going to grab that pawn. So I'm still up lots of material. I have 2 rooks, I have 2 more pawns. Okay, this is a discovered check with pawn takes pawn. This is all good for me. The board is wide open, the king's out in space, so opening up lines for rooks is all good. Alright, so now I'm going to put a rook here. Idea of rook d8 forces the exchange of rooks, and it should all be over. Also now notice that this king, because I have this rook on the f-file, the king is quarantined to this edge of the board. Okay, I can still play this move. Still actually comes with check now. So rook takes is now compulsory. Otherwise it'd have lost the rook. And now the king literally only has, you know, a few squares here. And my opponent offers a draw. I will decline politely. I think if this is a rated game, it's a 16-0 game, so accepting a draw would just give away 8 points, so I'd lost a game to somebody rated similar to me. Okay, so I'm expecting a resignation would be correct now. Channel Mr. Scheibel, you resign now. That's not in the rules. It's not rules, it's sportsmanship. Come on. Otherwise, it really is going to be a formality. Let's see what you do. You're not going to run the clock down on me. Surely, Alexa mad. Right, if there's a break in the video, it means that I've been standing here with my hands in my pockets for up to 53 minutes while my opponent figures out that they've lost the game and cannot proceed. So what would I do in this situation to make 100% sure of the win? Okay, first thing, I would probably move my rook up to like f4, where it's protected by a pawn. Okay, that means that all of these squares are unavailable, and also even if the king should come here, it can't capture the rook because it's defended by a pawn. Then my king can simply make its way all the way up here and gobble up these pawns with the help of the bishop. Then we can just push one of these pawns up here and get a queen or a rook and finish off the game in pretty sweet style. It's always good to have a plan, even if you're completely winning. Okay? Have a plan for how can I absolutely 100% not fail to lose this game. And also not checkmate, not stalemate as well. Very important. Okay, what are you going to do? The game is lost. Lost, all is lost. Right, I shall probably see you in a few minutes. Okay, and finally my opponent resigned with 46 minutes left on the clock after about an 8-minute wait. Were they a good sport? No, they were not. Okay, so there we go. So yeah, what I've tried to do is just take a little bit more time and go a bit more into the thought process of why one move over another, and just showing that comparison between somebody rated between 600 and 700 and somebody rated quite a bit higher. Okay, so hopefully that will just show you, you know, if you're rated below 1,000, it'll give you some ideas, hopefully some tips to pick up on, but just start to show you a bit, you know, the way of how to keep climbing in your chess progression. So I hope it's been useful for you. Please do subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and I'll see you soon.